So we've got Liz Williams with us today, and she is the founder and primary curator for the Southern Food and Beverage Museum in New Orleans. Did you know that there was such a thing? I'm sure Liz has got a lot of words of wisdom to impart on us. All right, let's get going.
We're happy to have Liz Williams here with us. She's the founder of the Southern Food and Beverage Museum in New Orleans. And this year they're celebrating 20 years in, I guess, existence is the right way to put it. And it's taken, from what I understand, I mean, you started in various different formats to come to where you're at today. So what we're hoping to hear about is a little bit about your background and your New Orleans background, and then also take us to what led you to come up with this idea, or not just come up with the idea, but what led to the idea, and then the persistence to see what it is today. And I've also heard from other interviews some of the plans for the future. So those sound really interesting. And so I think this is maybe it's a hidden gem that a lot of people don't know about Louisiana and New Orleans, but could be something that folks can use to help bridge gaps in between there. If they're looking for their own culinary history and stories, maybe this is a good place to start. And it's not just Louisiana. You may got all the southern states. So I'll let you tell us a little bit more about it.
I was always interested in food history and food culture. I never wanted to be a chef. I never wanted to be a dietitian. I wasn't interested in that. I mean, I love to eat. It wasn't that part. But I was not, I'm from Louisiana. I grew up in New Orleans, and I'm half Sicilian. So that's two food cultures right there. And so once that happens, you're just, you're just steeped in it. And so I was interested in studying that. But when I was in college, there was no way to study that. There was nothing like food studies or anything that would make you be able to study something like this. So I wound up getting a degree in English, and then, still not knowing what I wanted to do, I wound up becoming a lawyer. So I practiced law. I went to join the military. I lived in Europe for 3 years, traveled all around, kind of used being in Europe as a way to learn about all the cultures there, and then came back and I practiced a little bit. And then I wound up working as the CEO of the UNO Foundation. So the UNO Foundation is kind of the parallel universe of UNO. And we wound up opening first the D-Day Museum, which is now the World War II Museum, and also the Ogden Museum of Southern Art. And so I realized that I really liked museums. And so it's a really wonderful way to learn about something without reading all about it, and it's very visual. So I left UNO and I said, I'm going to start a food museum, because I never lost my interest in food. I just had no way to use it.
I was thinking, just when you were talking about you spent some time in in Europe, did you get a chance to go back and visit Sicily with your Sicilian roots?
I did. Okay. I did. I visited Sicily more than once. And it was really interesting, because you could see all of the roots of the food, things that my grandmother cooked and the whole Sicilian community cooked, and you'd see it in Sicily. And so it felt very connected. So yes, that was wonderful. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I remembered, like, I'd heard that you had helped with the D-Day Museum and the Ogden Museum. And so Yeah, I remember when I heard that the first time, I was thinking, well, that's got to be some pretty good under training grounds for creating your own museum.
No, I was going to say it's a lot easier to do it when you work for the state and you can testify before the legislature and ask the legislature for millions of dollars than it's when you have to do it as a private citizen.
So had you already understood that was going to be the case when you set off to do this?
Oh yeah, I knew it was going to be hard.
Okay. Well, with the go ahead.
No, I was just going to say people know what an art museum is. You don't have to explain it to them. But when you say I'm going to start a food museum, the first question they say is, "What is that?" And so you have all this education learning curve to bring people up this learning curve. It's not as simple as something like an art museum.
And you actually made me think of another thing. So when you said food museum to begin with, first of all, was it always going to be Southern food or Louisiana foods? But then also, did you have any examples that you could draw upon of what a food museum even looks like to guide you in this journey?
Well, we looked around to see whether there were food museums that we could go and visit. So a lot of the ones that were up and functioning were museums that were really marketing arms of their companies, like the World of Coca-Cola in Atlanta. There was a place in Napa that was called Copia that had just opened and was really received a lot of major funding from Robert Mondavi. But they closed, they went bankrupt. And so we, decided that that wasn't going to be our model. And
or how not to do it, maybe.
I mean, they thought really big, and they went for it. They had Julia Child on the board and Jacques Pepin. I mean, they had big people on the board, and
that's where all the money went.
I understand why they thought so big, and I think that was really ambitious and wonderful. But one of the things I learned when raising money for some of the other museums we talked about is like you can say, okay, I need X amount of dollars. And by the time you raise it, times have changed, costs are different. And so now instead of needing X dollars, you need X plus something dollars, right. X plus Y dollars. And then by the time you raise that, then it's still not enough because time has gone by.
Right.
So I realized that we would be better off starting small and growing than just waiting until we had this massive amount of money. First of all, you can only be an idea for so long. If you never make it materialize, then at some point people think, well, it's a great idea, but you haven't made it happen. You just have a sort of grace period when you start announcing the idea where you can spend some time raising funds. But at some point, it's like you've been raising funds for a very long time. You have got to do it, So I realized it was better to start small and grow instead of just going big. So that's what we did.
And so you can tell us how that growing small started. I guess you started virtually initially.
Well, yeah, you're not real if you don't have a website. Even in 2004, you needed to have a website in order to exist. So we had a website and we started doing pop-ups. Now, the name pop-up it wasn't in use. We would say that we're having a temporary exhibit in borrowed space. And now we can look back on it and call it a pop-up, but that's not what we called it at the time. Yeah. But it gave people an idea about what we were doing. Well, this is an idea. This is one exhibit. And we started literally in various malls. We started in the New Orleans Center, which was a mall near the Superdome. And it was in a transition. A new company had bought it. And so they had a lot of empty space, and they gave us a shop for like 90 days just so we could do it while they were kind of organizing themselves. And then we moved to the Canal Place, and we moved to several different places. And ultimately, in 2005, we had an exhibit at the Riverwalk in New Orleans, another mall, and that was in the whole public space, so that as you walked through the Riverwalk, it was in the public spaces. It wasn't actually in a shop. And
Okay.
and that's where it was when Hurricane Katrina hit.
Oh, wow.
And so that was, well, that stymied everybody. I mean, we weren't the only
Hmm.
ones who had to deal with that.
Sure.
Right. But I guess in
The,
some ways, maybe it was better to not have a physical location that you had everything at, given that fact when it hit.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it was a mixed blessing. A lot of the money that was available post Katrina was only available to places that were fully opened before Katrina. In other
Mm-hmm.
words, they were there to restore the arts organizations and the cultural organizations that had been harmed by Katrina. And so we didn't qualify for those things. So even though we were in a temporary space and we had a pop-up, it wasn't ours and it wasn't our space. And so it didn't count. And so we wound up really having to kind of find our money more independently than maybe we would have if we'd already been open.
So after that, how long did it take you to get back into a physical location?
So we waited a little while for the city to kind of, there were so many buildings that needed
Oh
to be
yeah.
repaired, was all of that.
Hmm.
So we by 2006 we were doing exhibits again, pop-ups. We had a pop-up at the James Beard Awards in New York, by
Okay.
invitation, the James Beard Foundation. And of course, that was about Katrina and the
Hmm.
damage that was done to restaurants and the importance of restaurants in helping the spirits rise, that sort of thing in New Orleans. And we wound up permanently in the Riverwalk for 5 years that started
Okay.
in 2008.
Hmm.
And the relationship that we had built with the Riverwalk that allowed us to have a pop-up meant that we had the beginnings of a relationship so that we could see about being in the Riverwalk. And the Riverwalk had a lot of empty spaces in it, and it had
Hmm.
gone from being one of the most productive malls in the United States on a per square foot basis to one of the least productive. And
Wow.
so they were looking for some new ideas and things to put in there. And so we kind of fit that bill.
I was trying to remember if I had. I mean, my kids are now 21 and 17, but I know we'd go to the aquarium every so often, and I want to think that we walked through there around that time, but I can't say positively. So because I kind of want to think in my mind that I'd seen something from y'all back then, but I'm not. I can't say definitively that I did. But at least
Mhm.
that gave you, I guess, a place that you draw a dot on the map where where people could come and find you and see
Right.
what you had. Did you have what kind of exhibits did you have there at that time?
So we didn't have all of the states represented because this space wasn't really big enough. So we had a big Louisiana gallery, and then we had rotating gallery where we would have different states. It might be Alabama, or it might be Georgia or Kentucky or whatever, and that would change. And then we had a partnership with the Museum of the American Cocktail, and they had a gallery inside of the space. So it was smaller than the space that we have now, but it was so gratifying because in the very beginning we didn't really have that many artifacts. We had a
Hmm.
lot of plaques with different kinds of explanatory materials and pictures of things, but everything was
Right.
mostly flat. And then
Okay.
once people started to come, they would people would just people who didn't know us or anything would just bring us artifacts and say, here, this is in my garage and I know it's too important to throw away, but I really don't want it. Can I give it to
Hmm.
you? And I had, at that point, I was living in uptown New Orleans, and I had a front porch. And I would get up to get the newspaper in the morning and go out on the front porch, and there would be artifacts that people had. So people were really, really generous. And I mean, we must have struck a nerve of some sort where
Hmm.
people thought, we need a place for this. And so I was always flabbergasted, but it really made us be able to have in-depth exhibits right away
Wow.
because these artifacts were just showing up with no note, without anything. We couldn't even thank people.
I remember this story from your podcast. You were talking about this, that people would just leave stuff on your porch. That was nice of them and all, but at the same time, it's like, well, what is this? Where did it come from? What's the history behind it? And then that becomes its own kind of, what do you call it? Expedition in and of itself, right? Because you're trying to understand not necessarily everything, but I mean, you had, I'm sure there was some stuff you had to do some sleuthing on to figure out what this is, right? And then do you have a lot of stuff that's just in archives that's not on display? You do?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I figured
Yeah.
as
We
much.
rotate it. We try to
Yeah.
rotate it so that every time you come, you get a little bit of a different experience. It's not
Mm,
always the same.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
I was thinking when you were talking that maybe the other result of Katrina perhaps was the fact that, I mean, I know how many people in the stories that I've heard of New Orleans, especially people being displaced and then just wanting to come back and just have the foods. I'm also wondering if maybe it made people realize that, I've got this sign or this cookbook or this cookware that is tied to something in New Orleans, and either instead of it just collecting dust or it going to a junkyard or to a flea market, it's important that it be saved, and maybe y'all could use it. And that's great because now my wife would probably hate this, but I'm thinking, man, if I walked out on my front porch and somebody left me some artifacts of stuff
Keep your address to yourself, buddy.
then
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, because I like Louisiana cookbooks and stuff, so if I ended up with some on my front porch, like, hey, but I won't say that too loud, but I can imagine that there's some excitement there because of like you said, you're not expecting it, and then there's the thrill of maybe figuring out what it is if you didn't already know what it was. And then, and I imagine there was probably some hidden gems in there too, that there were things that, just kind of were, I don't know if you could put a value on them monetarily, but, just probably flabbergasted that you even received those type of things, I'm guessing.
Well, one of the things we received, which has been a big, wonderful center of a lot of our cocktail exhibits, is that we received the bar from Brunning's restaurant.
Oh, wow.
The restaurant opened in 1859. It was a restaurant on stilts out in Lake Pontchartrain. And, with a little boardwalk that just
Mm-hmm.
took you from the shore out to the restaurant. And as I say, they were opened in 1859. They had a bar that was a Brunswick bar. So before Brunswick started making billiard tables and bowling alleys,
Okay.
they were in the bar kit business.
Huh.
So you had a catalog that had the pictures of the bar, little drawings of the bars that they could make for you, and you'd order it. I want it to be this long or whatever. And so this is a bar that is mahogany, and it also has other woods, but it has a back bar that's 14 feet tall. It has Carrara marble colonnettes. I mean, it's a
Wow.
beautiful bar. So in 1998, we had a hurricane that was George,
Mm-hmm.
and that one was like the final blow to Bruning's restaurant. And that was almost 150 years after they
Wow.
opened.
Right.
And they couldn't fix it because by that time the environmental laws had changed and you couldn't put new pilings into the lake. So,
Wow.
it was just too rickety.
Yeah.
And so they kind of knew it was, going to happen. So they bought a building right at the place where the boardwalk started at the water's edge. And they said, well, we'll just move into that building. But it only had 12-foot ceilings and the back bar was
Yeah. Couldn't
14
fit it. Yeah.
tall.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they put the bar into storage in a storage unit in the middle of the city.
Mm-hmm.
So then in 2005, when Hurricane Katrina came, just 7 years later, the storm surge took out the entire building, but this
Wow.
bar was in storage. Now it went underwater, and it was underwater the full 3 weeks that it took to
Wow.
drain the city. It
Hmm.
was in 176 pieces in one big room in this storage facility. But it was rising water. It wasn't the storm surge or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And the family decided to retire, that they just weren't going to reopen again.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said, do you want this bar? Come get it. And so
Wow.
we went to the storage facility, 176 pieces, and we put it back together, and it's in the museum now.
That's awesome.
That's cool.
That is priceless. That type
Yeah.
of product, and the fact that it survived the flooding in and of itself is a testament
Mm-hmm.
to that the handmade quality and everything that went into
Yeah.
that back in the mid 1800s. That's just insane. That's so cool.
And the Carrara marble colonnettes were orange. They were bright orange, kind of like a nutria teeth, orange.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And finally, somebody said to us, that's 150 years of nicotine that has been
Wow.
deposited on that marble. And so we had it removed, but so that they're that white and kind of black veining in
Yeah.
it now.
Oh my
But
gosh.
it was an amazing, amazing transformation to not have orange columns.
Yeah.
Imagine the generations.
Do you have any
Right.
sense of the origin of the marble, like where it might have come from?
It's Carrara marble.
Oh, it is.
It came,
Okay.
so I'm assuming that they had granite and other choices that you
Sure.
could have chosen in the catalog.
That's super cool. Yeah. I love
Yeah.
those kind of stories.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
thinking the years ago, we're from the River Parish area, so there's a St. James Historical Society Museum, which is a small museum in Lutcher, which I think actually moved now to the Welcome Center out there. But when we went out and looked at it, I think it was like a small drugstore that had been moved, and there were all kind of housewares in there. And so, and it wasn't even categorized probably as well as your stuff is. So the guy it was a voluntary type of tour that they took us on. And I remember we went through it, seeing all the old washing machines and the cooking stuff for the kitchens and such. And I mean, I was kind of like a kid in the candy store. My wife told the old guy there, she said, if you lived nearby here, you'd be here every weekend, probably helping y'all out. And I think he was saying the same sort of thing, is that people would They got a lot of that when people were either cleaning out their barns or something, their grandparents or parents had passed away, and they're going through stuff in these old houses, and it's like at least they recognize enough of the value. It may not be valuable to them, but that it's valuable to somebody else, and they're not necessarily looking to monetize it other than just, want it to go to a good place.
Yeah.
So
Right.
that's so hopefully you still get a lot of people who take you up on that and feel the need to share that with you.
We do. And people actually ship it to us from out of town. They've come to the museum and they say, I have this. Would you be interested in it? And then they ship it to us. We had a board member once who was from Arkansas, and he loved old signs. And so every time a barbecue joint or a restaurant or something would close, he would go and ask them for the sign. And we have an old Mackenzie sign.
Yeah,
We
I heard
have
about that one.
Mark sign.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
How
But
big is that
it's
Mackenzie sign?
Oh, it's big.
Yeah.
Like maybe 12, 14 feet.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, but for
like-
those of you watching who are not from the New Orleans area, Mackenzie's was a very popular bakery chain, and they had a signature. Their king cake, and they were pretty much everywhere throughout the New Orleans area, and they had a very distinctive. Is it a green and white sign?
Oh,
Is
yeah.
it- yeah.
With pink neon.
With pink
right.
neon, yeah, of course. So, yeah, if you better be on top of those Camellia Grill people, so in case they ever decide to switch things up, you're the first one in line to receive, or even a bar stool from there would be really cool.
Right. That would be very wonderful. Yeah.
So that was, you said 2008, and then I guess you had 5 years in that.
That's right. Yeah.
That mall area, and so then now you started looking for a permanent location at that point. I mean, did you think about it as far as that you wanted to go somewhere else and get more attention, or you just needed more room probably at that point?
Well, when we moved into the Riverwalk, they told us that the company that owned it was going to sell it, and no one could get a lease longer than 5 years. And but we also knew that because it was temporary, that there was no putting a kitchen in there. There was no doing all of those sorts of things. We were in a space that had been the limited. And
yeah, I know exactly where that was. Okay.
And so we knew we were going to need a kitchen. We knew that to do the kinds of things that we wanted to do, it was going to take more space. And so we started talking to the redevelopment organization that the city had, New Orleans Redevelopment Authority, and finding out what properties were available, and so that's how we found the property. And the property we're in now was the Dryads Market. It's on Oretha Castle Haley, but the street used to be named Dryad Street. And in 1849, the city opened a market on that spot. It was an open air covered market. And then in the beginning of the 20th century, they tore down the covering, the pavilion that was there, and they built the building that we're in now, and it opened in 1912.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's a very fitting place, with it being a marketplace and being with food, and Southern food and beverage. So that's pretty good.
We say that is our largest artifact.
Yeah, that's true.
For sure.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it is. I mean,
you have pictures of how the market was set up in the old days that show?
Yes. But the other part of it that's so exciting is it has the same floor. And you can see in the floor the aisles and the outlines of the stalls that were still there that were rented out to people for whatever wares they had. I mean,
Wow.
you can tell what was there before because all the artifacts in the building artifacts
Hmm.
are still part of the building. So we're very fortunate that it hadn't been so renovated that people had
Yeah.
modernized it, gotten rid of things or anything like that. They hadn't.
Hmm.
Yeah.
How
That's pretty
how
neat.
was it putting a kitchen in that building with the
Well,
hood
there
and
was
the
a lot
fire
of
suppression?
jackboarding.
I can't imagine that was cheap, right? I mean,
No, it wasn't cheap, but uh, it was, we have two kitchens. We have a
right,
demonstration kitchen that has home appliances in it, and then we have a commercial kitchen. And so we rent out that commercial
right.
kitchen for
So,
entrepreneurs and others for pop-ups and whatever else they
right.
need.
It's licensed commissary. Okay, yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And y'all own the building now too, right?
Yes.
So,
Wow.
so you've got this historic building that you're in that you've got demonstration kitchens and commissaries, exhibits to show, and then you got space even outside for the what you call your gumbo garden,
Gumbo
which just
Garden,
sounds
yeah. Yes, the person who owned the building before we did bought the property that was adjacent to it in the back because who whoever had owned it, it was a house that was destroyed during Hurricane Katrina. And so they just bought it because it was the adjacent property. And so when we bought the property, we got that too. And we put doors in the back so that you could walk out onto the other property. And so there's a covered area where you can sit even in the rain and outside. And we have raised beds that really reflect Africa, America, and Europe, the three main continents that have contributed to the food of South Louisiana. And we plant them every season and show people. Well, we have a sassafras tree planted, and people don't know what a sassafras tree looks like. And
yeah,
we have a pecan tree and fig trees and citrus trees and all kinds of things that are food related because we're a food museum and we feel that we've just taken some of the concepts of the museum and just taken them outside. And so now they are the living portions of that story.
yeah.
People
The
have never seen okra growing. They've never
right,
seen so many things. So
You
yeah.
had mentioned
yeah.
chicory as one of
Uh-huh.
the items that people have heard of in the coffee.
Yeah. Yeah.
And do you grow chicory on site?
We do. We
Wow.
do. It doesn't grow, the root doesn't grow well because it's so wet.
Hmm.
But at least the flowers and everything look like they're supposed to look. And so we get to show people what the plant looks like. And then we bought chicory to show them what roasted chicory looks like.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that can be inside, but the plant itself is outside.
Is outside. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because that I can as a gardener. I mean, I'm thinking of all the different things you could plant and switch it out. But I mean, obviously with the raised bed and then trying to stick with those three specific areas, you're also kind of limited on. You don't want something that's going to just. I'm sure Melitone would take over your whole area if it started growing real well, type of thing. So
Right.
you have to be kind of to give equal space to things. I mean, the good thing with, like you said, the sassafras tree and the pecan trees is hopefully they'll be there for a while. Citrus
Right.
trees, those type of things where people can see that. Because I remember on my mom's side going down to Port Sulphur and seeing my great uncle had this orange grove down there, and I was just amazed to see oranges and grapefruits when he walked out his front door. Just this fruit hanging there, and all the stuff that I would just see in the grocery store. We were living in Texas then. So I can imagine from the standpoint of visiting the museum and and trying to reconnect and actually see those type of things, that would be, at least for somebody like me, would be pretty thrilling to actually finally encounter that type of thing. So, you probably, I guess you don't have enough to really take it inside and cook unless you maybe do some herbs or something.
Well, we do have herbs, especially in the European garden. We have some things like hyssop and other things that the native people grew um, for medicinal purposes as well as for seasoning. But we have in the African garden, for example, we have sesame seeds, we have we have peas, we have okra, we have sorghum, watermelon. But we just plant one seed of watermelon because it just wants to take over everything.
Right.
And so we're very mindful of that kind of thing because it just is everywhere. But it's kind of fun,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking too, another one of our cousin's daughters had gotten married about, I don't know, about 20 years ago. And her reception was, I guess, at Broussard's, and then it backed up to the home. It's the Herman Grima house. Is that right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
And so it was opened up, and I remember going through the courtyard and looking in there. And of course, I was amazed because it had the kitchen in the back in the outbuilding. But then what really got me is that they were growing a banana tree in a small area, and it's in the middle of all these buildings. I can't grow a dang banana tree for my life in Mobile. I guess I get too much shade, but I thought they're able to do that in this building. I mean, in these old courtyards, but yet it had a big bunch of bananas on it too, and it was a huge tree.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's kind of interesting to see that.
Yeah, we have a banana tree. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, we also have lemongrass and things that reflect the Asian influence on the food that's, more 20th century, but not 100% 20th.
Yeah. So you've got like we talked about, yet kitchen, you do some cooking classes there too, right? As part of the kitchen.
That's right. We have cooking classes, and we have entrepreneurs who use the kitchen, and all of it's open so people get to see them working. And there's just lots of opportunity. And right now we have children's camp. And at camp, the kids make their own meal for lunch, and they all sit down together and eat. And then they clean up, and they go into the garden and pick herbs and things. And it's all important for everybody to learn about our food. And I think sometimes we take it so for granted that we don't really talk about it. I mean, we talk about what we're going to eat, but we don't necessarily talk about the history or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's just taken for granted.
Yeah, I was going to say, especially, I guess, is like I said, my kids are, they're not, I mean, when I was in my teens and my 20s, I wasn't probably as interested as I became in my 30s with food and growing vegetables and different type of really digging deep into cooking. In my case, my wife's from Germany, so I wanted my daughters to learn about the Cajun, Louisiana Creole foods. And then I realized, even though my mom's still around, my grandmother just passed, that I thought, if I want them to learn, I'm probably need to step up and learn how to do it. So that kind of got me interested at that point. And so I can see that, these cooking camps, because like you said, there's a lot of times people we take it for granted, especially if it's all around you. And if the family members don't have an interest, or maybe that's something that their grandfather did out in the country or something, maybe they don't see it a lot. But if you can introduce it to them, at least now they have a place in their mind to say, I know where I can go find it or learn more about it after that first exposure. Is that like a one-day camp or a 1 week camp, or
a week? And so we have, there are multiple weeks, but it's a week at a time you sign up for, not just one day.
Okay.
Yeah. And then during the school year, we have children's programs on Saturdays where you might do just one thing. It's not all day. It's just a few hours.
You're talking about teaching, cooking, right? And you were using your grandmother's teacup that didn't have a handle, and that's how you measured things, right? And so, and you talked about how difficult it was in your book, you talked about how difficult it was to come up with the proper measurements for the recipes, everything that you knew how to. There you go. There's our token product placement there, and I thought that was hilarious because I've written books myself, but they're all technical books, but at the same time, it was still a process. You're teaching people how to do things. And if you miss a step, it throws everything off, right? And so now that are you conducting some of the classes yourself at the museum?
I'm doing this, like the special classes, like a class from that book or something special. I'm not doing it on a routine basis anymore. I did in the beginning.
Yeah, well, that's how it all starts, right? We got all this energy, and then after so many summers, you're just like, Jesus, no, no more. I get it. But how did you? Going from learning how to cook that way at home with your mom, like you said, she had one foot in Sicily and one foot in Louisiana, and your grandmother was first gen, right? She was first generation Sicilian, then moved over here, right? So how did you translate all of those different cooking styles into your own style that then you could then relay to other people who aren't familiar with your grandmother's teacup?
So, I do think that it's very Sicilian to not measure properly and all of that sort of thing. So it kind of goes with the territory. So that's kind of
okay.
But I had a really good editor who would send back recipes to me and say, come on, Liz, you measure this stuff. You can't just say a handful or whatever. You have got to take it in your hand and then transfer it to a cup measure and figure out if it's a cup and a quarter or exactly what it is.
Yeah.
So I had somebody holding me accountable who basically made me do it because I certainly didn't want to.
I know. I feel your pain. I had the same type of person working my book, and it was difficult because which was natural to me, or just kind of just a part of the process of doing whatever I was teaching. It was just kind of like, well, of course you'd click here, or of course you'd dial in this number to get this effect, that kind of stuff. But writing it down so that people could understand it and follow you step by step. That is I don't think people, kind of like David, we were talking about, I think with Chef Bienvenue, where we were talking with her about these cooking shows, and people are just saying, well, these cooking shows are just so easy to put together, and all you do is you just cook on camera. Yeah. I challenge anybody who has never been on camera live to cook a recipe, and it's a similar concept here. But now, and she was also mentioning this in her, she just did a rewrite of her book where there were measurements that were off, and nobody ever called it to our attention. Right. So, So I guess they either tried it and they said that can't be right, or they made something just completely awful, and whatever the case may be. Everybody's kind of learning this way, but as you teach or as you taught, when you cook at home, are you still just kind of dash of this, pinch of that?
Oh, yeah.
You are?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So when you're teaching the class,
the way I cook.
Okay. It's kind of like a do as I say, not as I do type thing. Right. Okay.
when I'm teaching the class, um, I'm very likely to just put something in and not measure it or
Mm.
whatever. Um, and then I'll tell people, one of the reasons why I am not I am not a person who is rigidly going to follow a recipe. And that's probably also because I'm not a baker. And I think
Yeah.
it's very important for bakers to be a little bit more rigorous than I am as a cook.
Yes.
But if you're making, let's just say you're making tomato sauce, every tomato tastes different.
Yeah.
And so if you just say have, 4 pounds of tomatoes and chop them
Hmm.
and then cook them down and whatever you say, well, you've seen people put sugar in their tomato sauce. My
Hmm.
grandmother would roll over in her grave if you did that. Because what she says is sugar is just sweet. There's no nuance to it. It doesn't really,
Okay.
it's too obvious. So if my grandmother would make tomato sauce with whatever tomatoes she had, and she decided that it wasn't sweet enough because those tomatoes weren't sweet enough, she would grate carrots into the tomato sauce
Huh.
to give them a sweetness. And then she'd cook it down until it was kind of lost in the tomato sauce. And you would never taste carrot, but
Right.
you taste the sweetness of the carrot. And it was very subtle. And it was just the way you wanted sweet. You don't want it to taste like ketchup
Right.
and sweet like that.
Right.
And and but sometimes she'd use two carrots, sometimes she'd use one carrot because she tasted the tomatoes and
Hmm.
she adjusted for that. And that was why she would object to saying you can't you can't always know it's one carrot. Sometimes it's two carrots,
Right.
Hmm.
sometimes it's no carrots. And so you can't accommodate that kind of nuance if you
Hmm.
only have a recipe.
Right.
Right.
And we're so accustomed in this country to have everything always taste the same. Every time you have macaroni and cheese out of that box, it tastes the same.
Hmm.
Every time you eat this out of a box, my grandmother used to lament the fact that people stopped making their own breadcrumbs. And
Hmm.
my grandmother had her mix, it was so much breadcrumbs, and she'd throw in some Parmesan cheese and some oregano and some salt and whatever else she put into it. And if she went to somebody else's, like let's say there was a party and it was so and so stuffed peppers or stuffed mushrooms or stuffed artichokes, she knew whose it was by what the
That's
stuffing tasted like because she knew everybody's cooking style.
right.
Oh,
And once
pretty neat.
everybody started using Progresso breadcrumbs,
Yeah.
everything tastes the same. And she just thought
Yeah.
that was terrible. So.
One of the nice things about having seasonal ingredients and ingredients from different sources is you do have those differences, and that you get to play with them. You get to do different things.
Well, my
Yeah.
grandmother sauce always tasted the same, but it was because she adjusted for
Right.
the change in
Right.
the
Mhm.
tomato, whatever. And that's why it's so hard to have a set
Yeah.
recipe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, I know that you wrote the book with your children in mind for them to have that connection to their Sicilian background and
Yeah.
the recipes. So even though you give out specifics as measurements, I'm just wondering from their standpoint, I don't know if they've ever cooked and done any of the cooking from it yet, any of the recipes, but I wonder as they cook in the future or in the present, and if they taste it and they say, well, it's not exactly like mom did, but she's got all her components here. I assume that they've learned and talked to you enough that they think, okay, well, yeah, maybe this carrot or, this is not as sweet as it. So maybe I need to add a little bit of this and that. And so I think that I appreciate the measurements from the standpoint of knowing as a guideline that, it's kind of like a rough tuning. You get it pretty close here, and then you start tasting it, and you may say, so like if I make a gumbo, I'm not really a big fan of a lot of celery in my Trinity. Some people have like a cup. I found out that I just didn't care for that. So I'll just cut it back to a half a cup or leave it out if I don't have it or don't need it. And so to me, it's nice to kind of look at it. My wife can't stand the fact that if I'm doing something from scratch, I'll look at 3 different recipes. I'll have them out on the table, and I'll look and say, okay, let me add a little bit of this. I think, until I get the taste that I like. So I said, why don't you just write them all down at the same time?
Well,
that was fun.
But it's also true that everybody's gumbo tastes different. And so this flavor that yours is the one that you're looking for because it's the one you like the best.
Right.
So, and yet we all recognize each other's gumbo. I come to your house and I say, this is gumbo. I don't say, oh, this isn't gumbo, even though it's different from mine. Right. And so, all you can do is say this approximates what I think it should taste like,
Sure. Sure.
And I am never offended if somebody throws in a lot of hot sauce or they, cut back on the oregano or they put 2 bay leaves in where I put 1 or whatever. That's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, and we also, so much of it is just what we grew up and it's what reminds us of home and just all of those things.
Sure.
Actually, my mom does use a carrot for her tomato sauce.
Does she really? Okay. So that makes me feel very happy.
Well, I wonder if your grandmother and if your mom know what's going on there to get the sweetness out of the carrot. I wonder if they understand I know you understand, you're a chemical engineer, but
no.
But yeah, I'm wondering, you're extracting the starches and then the starches are getting converted to sugar through heat, right?
Right.
And I don't know if a lot of people would understand that because you wouldn't say, you'd bite into a carrot and go, wow, that's sweet. But it's there, but it's just not, it's not something when you cook down, it does change the chemistry of the carrot, right? So I'm just curious.
My grandmother actually would caramelize tomato paste in olive oil, and it would just darken and darken as it caramelized to make sure there was enough sweetness in that sauce. So,
and no sugar.
No sugar ever.
Other than natural. So I was going to say, I have cooked your pork scallopini from the book, and it was delicious. And the other thing that I haven't, the problem I get is that I get too many cookbooks. And so I don't get to hit every recipe like I want to. But I was thumbing through it again. I saw one that I know that I've got to do is the melliton with the Italian sausage. That's what I did your pork scallopini.
Oh, wow. This looks really perfect.
Yeah. I forgot how good it looked, and I remembered I told you, or I made the comment, my wife wanted me to make it again, so I'm going to have to do that again soon. I see Jeremy looking at it. But sorry, that was the other thing I was going to compare for folks who've been watching the previous podcast episodes. In a lot of ways, your book is very similar in concept to Marcel Bienvenu's Who's Your Mom? Are You Catholic? And Can You Make a Roux? With the stories, the recipes from the past, and trying to preserve them and pass them on and save them to share. And like I said on her episode, every family, well, not every family, but maybe a lot of New Orleans and Louisiana families, you could easily put these kind of books together where you have your photo album, you have your stories, narratives, and then you've got these recipes that, I can find 2 or 3 recipes that Jeremy and our grandmother made, and then some on my other grandmother's side. And, I even scoured old newspapers because when they used to have a lot of contest, cooking contest from the Times-Picayune, the housewives would send in their recipes. And so you might actually see somebody that, oh, that's a distant cousin, and this is her Vacherie version of butter beans and shrimp. And so now I can kind of make that based off of that type of, and kind of connect that maybe this is how, this certain branch of the family might have cooked this. And so I think it's kind of important that people collect those things and share them. But like you said, it's not always an easy task to put it down in a way. And it doesn't always have to be published either.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
The last little components is that in addition to all the things we've talked about with the Southern Food and Beverage Museum, you also have basically a media component. You've got your podcast from the Nitty Grits Network, and your specific podcast is Tip of the Tongue.
Right.
And it's been running for what, 3 or 4 years now, or has it been that long?
3 years.
4 years.
Yeah, 4 years.
We
started
a lot of good information. What?
Started in 2020. Yeah.
2020. Okay. And then you've got other various ones on there, and that's the one that you do, but you got other hosts, I guess, that do the other ones.
Yes.
And those are all found on your Apple stuff. And I guess you were talking about expanding that a little bit going into now they're at 20 years. I know we also forgot to talk about the library at Nunez College too.
We have about 40,000 volumes, not all of which have yet been cataloged. It tells the history. We have history books about the development of bourbon or whatever. And so there are histories and biographies of chefs, not biographies, but stories about various industries. And we have books about silverware and table manners, and books just, about how to start a food business and how to start a restaurant or a bar, books about foraging, books about nutrition, just an enormous breadth of books that are related to food and drink. And we have thousands of menus. We have hundreds and hundreds of pamphlets and pictures and postcards and other kinds of ephemera. We have a collection of paper cocktail napkins and swizzle sticks and just all kinds of wonderful, fun things.
Yeah, David, but one of the things that you and I never talked about, there is a B in the acronym for this museum, and we haven't talked about the B part at all. And I'm curious, so the beverage component of this, you're talking about the cocktail napkins, things like that. So is this focused on a specific type of beverage, or not? Is this alcohol, non-alcoholic, all kinds of beverages? What do you focus on?
Coffee.
Oh, well, that's
so
fine.
we're about to open next week a coffee exhibit.
Nice.
It's a temporary exhibit. It's not going to be a permanent exhibit, although some parts of it will be permanently there. We're very interested in coffee and chicory. Just thinking of New Orleans and not even thinking of the whole South, you have nectar soda, and you have all these flavors that are very New Orleans flavors, Barks, for example. But we are also interested in soft drinks throughout the South, whether it's Coca-Cola or Dr. Pepper or some of the smaller ones like Cheerwine. And I mean, we're very interested in not only food, but beverage.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
It's kind of neat to go look when I do some historical research for certain things. I go down a rabbit hole, and I look through a lot of the old Times-Picayunes that I've got through the subscriptions online, and it's neat to look at the advertisements either for the grocery stores or just the beverage companies. And and in fact, looking at old pictures of trying to do a little detective work, this happened yesterday. Somebody had a picture of something in Mobile with a beverage on the side, and it was a bottle. It said Masons, and you could just tell it was something being poured. And the picture was from 1969. Well, I did a quick search, and Masons was a root beer company out of, I think, Georgia in the late 50s. They had a bottling company in Mobile. You don't hear about those anymore. So those kind of things, obviously, you got those type of resources that people can learn about, and even, I guess, maybe to a certain extent, if they need the tactile experience of maybe touching them in some cases, if they're doing certain researches too.
Yes, we have a lot of that sort of thing, and it's even interesting to see how bottles have changed. We were talking about beer earlier, and beer bottles used to be ceramic. Then they became glass, and then they were capped in a certain way. Then they had screw tops. Then they came in beer cans. I mean, then the cans used to have a church key kind of
Yeah.
opener, and then pull tabs. I mean, you could just go on and on and on.
So I guess the main takeaway for folks is that if you're doing some in-depth culinary or Southern food research, they need to come visit you at the Southern Food and Beverage Museum to do some real deep exploring and get, they can really get in touch with the past, so to speak, through y'all.
Right. And it's really important that we have books in multiple languages. We have books about the entire US and the world, because people from Minnesota moved to the South, and that begins to influence the food. So we don't limit ourselves to research that's written about the South, because it's you build a wall around yourself where you say we can't go here. So the people from Minnesota who moved to the South, I don't know who they are, but let's say that there are some people who did. They reading about the food in Minnesota and how they cooked and why they cook that way is going to be, and there's going to be an influence in the place in the South where they live now, or where their descendants live now. And you can't research that without those Minnesota cookbooks. And so that's it's also important that we have books, let's say, about Sicily that were written in Sicily, not just Americans or English speaking people looking at this, but what the people who lived there thought about it. And so it's their cookbooks. And so we have books in Japanese. We have a wonderful cookbook. It's not only a cookbook, it has household information and cultural information. So after the war, when there was occupied Japan, the Japanese people who were hired by Americans to work in their homes in Japan had so much trouble understanding a fork, understanding why you slept in a bed and not on the floor, and all these cultural things that were different. So we have a book that actually on one side is in English and on one side is Japanese, and it's page after page of, this is why Americans do this. They do it this way because, and it's to teach the Japanese who were working for the Americans who were occupiers, so that they could understand what it was that, because they didn't sit on the floor and eat. They sat in a chair at a table that was really high. It was way too high for a person who's sitting on the floor, obviously. And so, it's a wonderful book to flip through, and see the Japanese on one side and the English on the other.
Yeah, coming from a family where my wife is Japanese and I do travel to Japan frequently, and sitting on the floor is an incredible pain in my thighs. I'm always thankful that they are slowly. They have one or two things going now that I love. One is they actually cut a hole in the floor so you can drop your legs. So you're still sitting on the floor, but you drop your legs into the floor, which I love, because in the winter months they can heat that area and you got nice warm feet. Or of course the traditional chairs. But yeah, Man, I didn't realize how out of shape I was until I just tried to sit down and eat in Japan. It was it was rough. It was really rough. So yeah, there's a lot of, you know what? That still exists. There's still a lot of cultural divide between those two countries, just for example. But it's getting better with the internet and, access to information. But still, it is a bit
you would
of a
love
shock.
this book. You would love this book.
Well, I think my wife and I would. She'd read one side and I'd read the other side.
That would be an interesting video, y'all. If you could get her on camera, get a copy of the book,
good
and
luck
you read
with
that side.
Just stop right there. That's it. Yeah. And hard stop. Get her on camera. It's not happening. Not unless I do it like completely. Yeah.
So the Nunez community.
So I'm looking on Amazon right now. Your book is there, which we will put a link to in the description when this is published. This was published in what 2022. 22. Okay. All right.
And then the new book is the SoFAB cookbook, which is our 20th anniversary book.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about. So
the look on his face is tell me more.
So that book is about the food that we consider what's eaten in the South now. We thought that there were so many books that have traditional Southern recipes that we wouldn't be adding anything or documenting anything newly that wasn't already covered in other books that have already been published. But I don't know that there's as much documentation of how the food of the South is changing as new people move to the South or different trends happen and things like that. So when I always say if you eat it in the South, it's Southern food, no matter what it is. And but you do have influences and that change. And so new things become Southern. So it's always changing. And so we wanted to have a book that reflected the modern South.
Okay. Yeah. And besides yours, I listened to also part of the Nitty Grits Network is Poppy Tooker's Louisiana Eats. And so that's where I first really learned about kala, and I used her recipe. And to me, it was, I haven't made it in a while, but I had some leftover rice, and it reminded me of a kind of like a rice pudding beignet, if that makes any sense. It had the fluffiness and the crunchiness. I mean, it's really good. Now I want to make it again. But when you were saying that, the other thing I thought about was boudin egg rolls. There you got the Asian and the Cajun influence.
That's right. Exactly.
He does this every episode.
What? I make you hungry?
Yes, you do. Every single episode, you make me hungry.
Sorry. So I mean, so that's so that's like a good. So who was that book for the 20th anniversary? Was that just you, or was that a bunch of different?
Well, I had a co-author that's Maddie Hayes. So she and I wrote it together, but we had lots and lots of contributors who were contributing recipes. So although she and I obviously contributed recipes, many, many other people, chefs and home cooks. We did not want it to just be chefs. This is home cooks too.
Sure. Yeah.
So, and that book just went on sale a couple of weeks ago, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's new.
It's always cool to talk, to people who share similar passions to us, and things that I used to take for granted, especially on the food side of things, really did not hit me until I left New Orleans, and I began to see how rough it is in other parts of the country when it comes to food. And people thought I was nuts for asking, what are we eating for dinner while we were eating lunch? They thought I was crazy. And I'm like, what? What's the big deal? This is, doesn't everybody talk this way? Nope. It just doesn't happen. So you do, I think it's what you're doing is awesome. I can't wait to go to the museum when I go back. David, I think we might need to do a little on location.
On-site?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's on my list to come visit y'all out there and see it, because and especially after we started talking and finding out even more about the museum is much more than just that. I mean, and it's not just a stodgy old place to look at old artifacts. I mean, it's a vibrant, living entity and it's got all kind of facets. It's a testament to you with your vision and dream, and like I said, I think it's the next 20 years will be even more exciting from what we've seen so far.
I hope so. There just aren't that many museums where you can buy a drink and walk around with it. You can do that. That's pretty cool. I didn't even think about that. I guess I should have asked ahead of time. Okay, so I asked this of our last two guests, and I think it was kind of a fun question because it kind of puts you in the hot seat a little bit, but it's not that bad. You've got your cookbook and you have cooked a vast number of dishes, not necessarily being centered around one particular style dish or region or origin or anything like that. Your all-time favorite thing to cook is what? So I am a real fan of Thanksgiving.
Okay.
And I love to make a turkey bone gumbo with andouille sausage. And I always make for Thanksgiving, I make too much cornbread dressing with oysters because I want to have it left over for the next day. And instead of potato salad or rice in the gumbo that I made, I put a scoop of this oyster dressing in the gumbo. So you've got turkey and andouille and oysters in it. And sometimes, now that oysters are so incredibly expensive, I'm not quite so liberal with them, but I used to always throw in, like a pint of oysters or something into the gumbo too. So I guess that's one of my very favorite things. Everybody's really surprised by it, but they really love it. And so that's something. And so I like to cook it because people almost always really, really like it.
Now, did you bother to publish that in your cookbook?
Yes, I did.
I did. Nice. Oh, okay. Well, David, do you have anything more for Liz? We've really kept her a long time.
I was just going to tell everybody watching, if you have any artifacts or old cookbooks or anything, especially Louisiana, the South, or anything like she described, you know who to bring them to. Just have to look her up in Chalmette, or bring them to the museum. Probably be preferred at this point.
Send them to David's house first to have them screened by David, and then he'll bring it over.
Hey, I could work a deal like that. I was going to say, or if you had extras, 2 copies, you could leave one with me, and then I'll bring the other one to Liz. But yeah, that would be that'd be fine either way. We'll figure something out.
All right, well then we'll go ahead and wrap it. And Liz, again, thank you so much for your time and joining us. I really appreciate it.
It's been a lot of fun.
Once we get things a little bit further along here, I'd love to check back in with you and see how it's going at the museum. Like I said, if we can somehow swing it where David and I are back in town and do an episode from the museum itself, I would, if you're open to it, I would love to be able to do that.
That'd be great.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
What a great person to talk to. And she's done so much to bring attention to the food component of the South. And it's a living museum. It's not just something where, like you were saying, people looking at pieces of paper on a wall or something like that. The the working kitchens, the classes, the garden, all that stuff. It just sounds like a super cool place to go to.
I mean, it's surprising that, okay, so it's been around 20 years. It's surprising it hadn't been around 50 years or so.
We'll put the links to Liz's book and the museum's book, that the 20th anniversary book. We'll put those down below. All right, folks, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. If you haven't already, again, remember to make sure and like and subscribe. If you like the episode, great. Mention in the comments below if you've got your own experiences at the museum, if you've been already, and the things you liked about it, and things that other people might be interested in. And we will see you guys in the next episode. So, David, until then, take care of yourself, buddy.
Dude.
All right. See you, everybody. Bye.